everybody, and welcome to Commission Painting Vlog number 20. And I apologize for missing last month. And as some of you may have known, even though I missed doing my vlog, I didn't miss doing videos, as I think I did 5 in September. And that covered primarily my Halo Ground Command project. And that was a work in progress video series, which is very much like the videos I kind of started out doing, which are kind of a vlog format, discussing the project as I go along. And if you've never watched one of those before, I don't do a lot of on-camera painting, but I do discuss the techniques, the tools, the paints that I use to do the project as I go along. And so, yeah, again, that's kind of where this channel started, sort of, mostly. Yeah, mostly. And it seems to have been, reasonably well watched, so that I may end up doing a lot more of those, because once I'm set up to do it, it's pretty easy to do it. And I've actually been thinking about doing one for this guy. This is Skarak the Bloodborne, Greater Korgorath of Khorne, although he's not going to be a Khorne dude. He's going to be in a Tzeentch army, I believe. Anyway, so this last month, well, September, and now really even leading up into October, I've been super busy. That Halo project really kind of threw me a bit. It ended up taking more effort than I expected, and so I fell a little behind. But not only that, I think there was a little bit of schedule creep on that one, just in terms of when it was going to start, because not all the pieces were in place. There was all kinds of little things about that project that kind of threw me off. But it was sort of completed. One of the things that was a little off about this project was that when it originally commissioned, it was 2 sets of the minis. I don't know what that was. 2 sets of the minis, two starter sets, two player starter sets. And then somewhere not too long before it started, it became 3. And I wasn't even really paying attention to when it became 3. And I should probably turn off my phone. Anyway, so the project became weird and took up a lot of time. But I still managed to get another project done before that, which was some resin animals, a rhinoceros and a hippopotamus. And this is from the gentleman who has usually had me do more extinct things, sort of dinosaur era projects. I think you may have seen my saber-toothed cat, and then the diorama with saber-toothed cats and mammoth and vultures and other things. There's the tar pits. Anyway, I really enjoy doing large projects like this. And the other interesting thing is, when I got started on the Rhinoceros, I felt like, how am I going to make this interesting? Because they're gray. And, and it's not like I can go and make it that sort of punched up contrast that people generally do in gaming miniatures. This is supposed to be a more kind of true life, real world look. And I was very, very happy with the results, even though it's very subtle. But it's, I hopefully you're seeing this right now. I don't know what to say. It is very, there's a lot of variations to the gray. There's a lot of, there manages to be a lot of contrast, but it is just not that overemphasized contrast that is more prevalent in gaming miniatures. And, you know, it is one of my favorite pieces ever that I've ever painted. But another one of my favorites is the hippopotamus that I did at the same time. And the thing about the hippopotamus, and I'm kind of looking at it over here as I talk about it so that I can kind of, I don't have to just think about it in my mind. The hippopotamus was another one where I looked at the, you know, you look at pictures and you go, how am I going to make that interesting? Because they're just, you know, in real life, they're really just kind of dark brown. So what I ended up doing, if you look at my hippo, as again, I hope you're doing right now, the coloration that I used is really closer to what an infant hippo might look like. There's a lot more variation to the color in the skin, especially up towards the head. But really, I mean, hippos have a lot of variation to them. It's just that in general, they tend to be very monotone. So what I ended up doing was starting with a base tone of, I believe it was Iridian flesh. Do I still have it on the table? I do, and it was actually Cardic flesh from P3. And that was going to be kind of my warm base that would come through. And then on top of that, it is burnt umbers and black and, you know, other transparent colors to provide that variation that I wanted to see. And then, of course, the mouth, I believe, also started out with the Cardic flesh, but it also moves closer towards white, so a lot of really light flesh tones at the end. I think I actually even used Flesh 4, which is a very kind of reddish flesh tone, and then 2 and 1, which are, you know, moving on close to white from the War Colors line. And again, you know, those two projects fall among my favorite paint jobs ever. And yeah, so anyway, I go on and on, but if you've never done a larger model, like if you primarily work on gaming figures, I highly recommend sort of breaking out of your routine and grabbing something that looks interesting to you that is of a larger scale and just trying it out, because I think you'll discover that in some ways they're much easier to paint, but at the same time you can take everything that you've learned from painting small minis and apply them to the large models and get a really, really incredible result, because you're used to working at these really tiny scales. And so it's not a big deal to think about adding more detail to a large figure. Anyway, so what else? What else did I work on? Let's close this up. Well, you know, we could talk about the Halo project in particular, although really, if you want to know about that one, just go watch the videos, because there are 4 or 5 of them, so I don't really necessarily need to talk about it here. And this is something I'll talk about more on my 3D printed gamer episode, but I've been working on 3D stuff for my son's McCree cosplay. For all of you Overwatch players, I'm not an Overwatch player, but I am familiar with it. You know what's really weird is I'm getting to the point now where I play so few video games that I don't really know, like, I'm not one of the cool kids in the know anymore. So, yeah, my son's taken over that mantle. But this was a 3D print. If you look on the back, it's kind of sucky, but that's okay because it's the back. This hasn't, I need to get loops to mount this on a belt, because that's like the belt buckle. Badass mofo. And then I don't have it handy, but I also did a badge for his hat. And then what else have I been working? Oh, and this is all the parts to his gun. I've mostly just been printing it out here and there. It's not going to be ready for Halloween, but it should be ready for whenever his next con is, when he wants to cosplay McCree. So, but that's a personal project. That's not really, but it's things that I do for fun, and that's fun. Oh, but I did have another big project, and I'll show it to you here. This is the Bell Crow from Awaken Realms, and I really had no idea when I got this what this was for. I thought it was just a random, odd, large resin figure for gaming in general, not necessarily for a specific game. But I guess they have a game that they've been working on called The Edge, and I think it might have just recently gone to Kickstarter. And I had a lot of fun with this one. It's a very desaturated color palette, and he had specifically asked for the sort of graveyard theme. If you look on his back, he's got tombstones, headstones on his back, and so he wanted that included on the base. And I was actually planning to 3D print some until I discovered that I had a handful in my bits box. And so you can see 3 standing up in front of him, but there's actually another one laying down to the side with leaves overgrown. And this is actually one of the more, I don't want to say elaborate necessarily, but much more themed base than I've done in a while. Normally it's just straight up groundwork, but this was meant to sort of tie into the mini more. So like how that one worked out. Oh, right, these Malifaux minis. It's been, so one of my first projects when I went full time to painting was a big Malifaux project. And I still remember being at TempleCon because I decided to go to TempleCon with my son right as I was just getting started, and I already had more work than I thought I could do, and so I brought the Malifaux project with me and was actually assembling it in the hotel room. And in any case, it was nice to get back to that because I really like the detail of the Malifaux minis. They are tiny, they are fiddly, but they are so good. They are such nice minis. I don't play the game, but I've often wanted to find another game that I could play, that I could use these minis for. And that hasn't come up yet, so I don't actually own any. Well, I know I think I own one Malifaux mini, but it's for no reason whatsoever. And then I did a Hero Forge mini, and actually this is the first of several that I've done recently. And this one was, normally when I get them, I can say normally now because I've had a handful of them. Normally they are in that ultra high res frosted, the clear frosted minis that are kind of fragile. And this one was in their kind of experimental black plastic. And I have to say that I prefer the frosted. And the reason is this has some very visible banding in some spots. It's really weird because some spots you don't see it at all, but there's a fair number of places where you see this banding. And in other spots, there's just weird deposits of the plastic in random locations that looks like it was dripped on there. And I can't, for the life of me, figure out where that came from. But anyway, so it not only requires a little bit more cleanup, but you also have to kind of go back to like the screenshots of the mini to figure out, is that supposed to be there, or is that a thing on the figure that didn't turn out well? And every time I asked that question to myself, the answer was, that's just a blob of plastic. But the final results, as you can see, not bad. And the thing is, oh, and let me show you the next one, because I did do a couple more, and these were in the ultra detail frosted. And the weird thing is, these aren't the best ultra frosted detail minis that I've ever seen before. There's a little bit more texture. Sometimes you get a surface texture, like a pebbly surface texture on them, and this one had quite a bit of, or actually both of these, because there's two of them. Both of these had quite a bit of that. And but the overall results are really cool, and this really got me thinking that the Hero Forge concept is, feels like this is the future of miniatures. It may not be, because this is really super expensive, although when you think about the fact that you're getting a custom mini, like this is your mini to your specifications, and you compare it to like a single Hero mini from Games Workshop, it's comparable, if not cheaper. So maybe it's not that bad. Maybe GW is really helping to sort of make this whole concept more viable by having their prices so high. But it really got me thinking that this is super cool, and I kind of want to do this for myself. And the only problem I'm having right now is, since I don't have a specific need, it's not like I need to make my character and make a custom mini for it. I'm mostly just like, I want to make a custom mini. It's sort of like when I get into a video game that has character creation, and you spend 4 hours working on your character before you ever start playing the game. It's sort of like that, except that because there's really so many genres of character that you can potentially make, it takes even longer, because you're like, oh, here's this cool sci-fi guy that I made. Oh, but if I just put this hat and give him this weapon, now he's a fantasy guy, or whatever. Anyway, it just goes on like that. I actually ended up making my first character in, well, I might actually even have a screenshot, but my first character that I made was really meant for like early colonial America guy. Randomly, well, not so random. I have reasons why I might want something like that, but it's not even a genre that that ForgeWord really focuses on at all. It just happened to have this one hat that worked out well, and then I could add other fantasy accessories that made it work. And then I did a Reaper mini that was pretty cool. I did another Sabine TIE Fighter for X-Wing. Definitely a little easier this time. This time I decided to pop off the panels, the side panels, so that I could more easily get in and paint them, and that really helped. And turned out it wasn't that hard to take those off. I don't know if there was much glue holding those on at all. And then I did a Poe X-Wing for X-Wing, but instead of doing the Force Awakens X-Wing, I was given an original X-Wing to do, so I had to figure out a way to kind of translate that over. Let me give you a little secret about the Poe X-Wing and doing the repaint. The classic X-Wing that you buy from Fantasy Flight, or really the classic one that you see in the movie, is essentially a mirror image or reverse image of the Poe X-Wing colors. So the classic is like white and blue, and Poe is black and orange. That's really just reversed colors. So you can just use the original coloring as a guide when you're doing your repaint, which makes it a lot easier. So then moving to try to do it on one that didn't have that guide took a lot longer. And then that brings me to the latest mini that I painted. I don't have it here to show you on hand, but I do have photos, or a photo, well, two photos, but combined into one. Or maybe I'll show you both. Now I'm just babbling. Anyway, and it is my first monochrome paint job. And the nice thing about doing this is well, nice thing and scary thing is the client asked for this particular paint job based on a Jen Haley paint job. And for those of you who follow pro painters at all, you've probably heard of Jen Haley because she is on the far upper level of those who do this for a living. And I'm sure she makes a lot more money per mini than I do. So when somebody says, hey, can you copy a Jen Haley paint job? That's going to make me a little concerned. But as it turned out, and really helpful, is this particular paint job had a video associated with it that you could purchase, which I did. Gotta say that I was a little underwhelmed with the video. It was helpful, don't get me wrong. I was very happy to watch it, but it just seems to end abruptly. It doesn't really cover everything. And you know, in the end I was left going, but what about this? Or how did you do that? But it was enough. It was certainly enough for me to get this result. Actually, maybe I can show you a side-by-side. Hers is still definitely better, but I figure I got pretty well into the ballpark there. So I was very happy with it. And since I'd never done a monochrome before, that was also a little disconcerting. You know what's really weird? As I was looking at the model, as I was painting it, I was like, wow, this is really, really monochrome. Like, I used two colors. An ivory color of indeterminate origin, because it doesn't have the label on it, and burnt umber from my Joe Sonia line, and then just mixed variations of that. I think Jen said she used an ivory, but it was a Reaper ivory, and then her dark tone was walnut brown, also from Reaper. Very similar. Very, very similar colors. I think her walnut brown is a little blacker than my brown. But anyway, the weird thing is, when it's all done, I start seeing more color in the model, which is really weird. Like, my brain begins to superimpose like more flesh tone into the face and more color into the bow, and it's really weird. It's like it's like an optical illusion. And the really funny thing about that is when I first saw pictures of her version of the model, I assumed that it was monotone but with some other colors. And then as I was painting mine, it's like I'm not seeing those other colors until it was done. And then I started seeing those other colors, which aren't there, which is very strange. So, so I don't know what to tell you. Maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just going insane. But bottom line, I was very happy with this. I didn't follow her instructions to the letter. In some places, I just used my own. Like, I would look at something and go, well, I see how you did that, but I would normally approach it this way. Because I like using, I think I like using glazes and washes, whereas she might build up a highlight. I would sooner sort of shade down and build up less, if that makes sense. Anyway, makes sense to me. So that about covers where we are since the last time, which is why I've spent, nearly 20 minutes here just talking about stuff. So we may end up getting 2 episodes worth of content in this video to make up for last time. So as you might imagine, with my schedule being as it is, I haven't really been doing any gaming at all. Well, there's not much else to say. I'm not really doing any gaming, and it's really making me sad. And with that in mind, I've been trying to figure out a way to kind of more stabilize my schedule and stabilize my income levels. And for that reason, I'm actually taking a part-time job. It's kind of weird. I have had a really good relationship with the guy that works at my local post office, which is tiny. I like to think of it as a frontier post office. Has very limited hours, and I have to go there in a very small window in order to pick up my packages or drop off my packages, or else they don't go until the next day. But I went in one day and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to be leaving soon," and I was sad because, it's kind of fun having a good relationship with a guy that you see on a regular basis. Sort of at a retail customer relationship. And then I thought about it and I was like, ooh, the guy that was here before him really was useless. So I'd come in and ask a question and it'd be like deer in the headlights kind of looks, like, I have no idea. That guy didn't last long, but it made me think, oh, this could get bad again. I was like, you know what? I should put in an application for your job. And, we both laughed about it. And a couple of weeks later, I went in and I go, so, how'd that work out? Did anybody, somebody who's replacing you? And he's like, oh, nobody made it through the interviews. It's like, oh, that just sounds bad. And so I turned in an application for his job and I got hired, and so starting soon, I'll go into training and then I'll start working for the post office. And the other reason for doing it, aside from kind of stabilizing my schedule and maybe cutting back on the painting a little bit and having a little bit more free time, but is also the possibility that, my wife wants to be able to do some things. And right now she is the one that is responsible for our medical benefits. And this might be a way I can take that burden off of her. So, as you can imagine, painting miniatures doesn't provide much in the way of benefits. So anyway, I think that may end up disrupting my schedule over the next month or two, November and into December, because training is about 3 weeks in toto, and I'll be doing that full time. And then once I start working, although I'm really only scheduled for part-time, we are going to be, right as my training finishes, we'll be rolling into the holiday season, and I would expect that I would have to do overtime during that period, because that's when they're really busy. So hopefully it won't disrupt it too much, and I actually sort of took the gas off of my taking projects and tried to create kind of a buffer zone so that I wouldn't get into a situation where I was delaying everybody's projects. So that's where that's going. So there's a couple of Kickstarters, and I don't normally talk about Kickstarters much, but there was a couple of Kickstarters that I wanted to mention. One of them is already concluded, but it sort of leads into another one, and then another one after that. Anyway, you might recall that we had a discussion recently on one of my videos about miniature holders for painting. And there was that Kickstarter with the really super nice wooden miniature holders that concluded, and they did big numbers, and it was great. And they ended up, I think they even ended up shutting down taking new customers, essentially, because there may have been some concern as to whether or not they could fulfill any more orders. And they had staggered out a lot so that, the earlier you were in, the earlier you were going to get your mini holders. So I still personally have concerns about their ability to fulfill all that, which is something I talked about in the video. But right after that whole thing, another Kickstarter popped up with somebody who was doing 3D printed files that you could get for something similar to this, but with more functionality, the ability to actually hold the base and such and so on. But as it's a 3D printed file, you can print as many as you want once you get the thing. So I did contribute to that, and I should be getting that any time now that I think about it, and I haven't seen that. So I'll have to look into that. But they were saying that that was going to happen this week. In any case, that same company, this is the John Steins, started another one for 3D printed terrain, which has really 3D printed files for making your own terrain has really exploded on Kickstarter. And there has been, I want to say, half a dozen. Part of me thinks that maybe that number is too high, but I don't think so, because I did contribute to the Apocalypse Ruins set. There's this one, which is, before I get ahead of myself, that John Stein's, his Kickstarter for terrain pieces is for city buildings, not unlike stuff you would see in New York, Chicago, what have you. But it has, like brownstones and shops and like a big donut place with a giant donut on top, which is more Los Angeles, really. But anyway, there's been, I think, several fantasy related, like dungeon tiles and things like that. But the cool thing is, like, when I bought my 3D printer, I assumed that the thing I was going to use it for most was terrain. And I thought, well, there's a lot of stuff on Thingiverse and other places that I can download and print, and that'll be great. But I can also design my own stuff and print that. And although I do design my own stuff, I haven't been designing terrain so much. I've mostly been doing other projects like the props, guns, things like that. And every now and then designing something that I need. So the terrain, while it's happened, it's just been sort of sporadic, and it's just been like, ooh, that's kind of cool. I'm going to print one of those. I don't necessarily need it. But now we're getting to a point with all of these Kickstarters that if you have a specific need, you might be able to find it. Different genres and different types, and it's not all encompassing yet. It's not like you can find 3D files for every use yet, but the 3D Kickstarters are coming so fast and so furiously that, for one thing, it's going to fill up. At some point, there's going to be enough, but there's going to be a diversity of files that you'll be able to grab, which means that you'll be able to print as much as you need and be able to fill up your table for, relatively small amounts of money, which is fantastic and was really kind of my dream for my 3D printer. So right now, if you have been thinking about getting one and you haven't yet, because you think maybe there's just not enough there, now would be the time, I think. Now would not be a bad time to pull the trigger on it. So just food for thought, that's all. The other Kickstarter I wanted to mention was one that I just discovered this morning. Oh my gosh. So this falls into the category of things I really don't need, but things I really, really want. And this is a laser cut design transport for miniature painters. And it holds paint, it holds your tools. It comes with different sizes. I can get one made for dropper bottles or one for GW paints. And it comes in different sizes, so you can hold a few or you can hold a bunch, and don't need it. My wife actually works for Pelican, which is a company that makes cases. So, as you might imagine, I have like every shape and size of really cool plastic case that one might need or want. I've got one that's a toolbox that I originally got to sort of drag paints around, but because I don't drag paints around that often, I don't really use it. So again, things I don't really need, but man, you look at these things and think, that is badass, and I want it, and then I would find a use for it. Like maybe I'll just start painting, I'll take all my painting stuff to a coffee shop and drink coffee and paint minis. I'm not going to do that. But it would be fun. It would be cool. It'd be neat to have that little thing and you open it up and you got all your paints out and you got your little light there and you're painting and sipping your coffee. That'd be all right. I think that'd be a worthy reason to own that. But yeah, don't need it. Super cool. So I'm going to end this with a question for you. For those of you who have worked with Forge World kits, this guy here, Skarak, who I talked about briefly at the beginning, I was priming him yesterday. Actually, let me back up a bit. I washed him thoroughly with detergent and a toothbrush, as one does with resin models. Brought him back in. After he was completely dry, I was priming him, and the primer beaded up. Not everywhere, but on certain spots. And just briefly, the Stynylrez primers from Badger are fantastic for resins. And so I don't usually worry about this, because what I'll then do when I see that happen, and what I did in this case, is stopped priming, wiped the primer from the area that it was beading, and washed a little bit with some Simple Green, dried it, and then went back to priming. That usually does it. But I've had several locations where that didn't do it, and in fact needed to go in and really rub it down with a paper towel, and sometimes multiple applications of Simple Green. And in some cases, it just didn't want to do it. And it took a lot of effort to get to the point where the primer was sticking. So have you ever had that problem? And what did you do to solve it? Because, if I'm going to get more Forge World models in the future, and I actually have another one on the workbench that is assembled but not even washed yet, what would you do? The instructions actually say, let me see if I can find it. Before assembling a model, wash each part thoroughly with an abrasive brush. And for me, abrasive brush means like a toothbrush should do just fine. I mean, they weren't talking about a wire brush, were they? I mean, they're not expecting me to go in and like sandblast this thing in order to make the paint stick, are they? Because that would seem, well, counterproductive. Anyway, that's a question for you. What do you do to get the paint to stick to resin that doesn't want the paint to stick? Because clearly it's because of the mold release. But I've never had this much trouble getting rid of mold release. So, thoughts, opinions, solutions? The ball is in your court. But I think that's going to do it for today. I think we're up to maybe 40 minutes, which is about twice as long as these videos normally go. So, yeah, I think that's going to do it for today. As usual, if you like the video, please click like on the video. And if you want to make sure you see more of these in the future, you might want to subscribe. That's all I'm saying. Hey, and I haven't mentioned it in a while, I don't think, but I got a Patreon thing going on. every now and then somebody joins the Patreon, they kick me $1 or $2, and they can see these videos with no commercials, which if you're using a, like a ad blocker, you don't see anyway. But I like to think they're doing it because they like the videos and, want to leave a tip. And that's awesome. So if you're thinking about it, maybe you should do it. Or maybe not. There's no requirement. Just thought I'd point it out. There will be a link in the description. Unless you're watching this through Patreon, in which case there won't be. That's going to do it for now. Thanks a lot for watching. I will see you on the next one. Bye.